Erowid note, some authors report suspicions that their cannabis has been laced, adulterated, in some cases presumably with PCP. While this is possible, readers should be aware that idiosyncratic response to the effects of cannabis, usually higher doses, can lead some users to presume their cannabis has been laced. There is no way to know if the cannabis in the report below was adulterated or not. It was December. I had just ended a 4-month hiatus from smoking marijuana. I was getting very high and certainly enjoying becoming reaccustomed to pot once again. Towards the end of the month, right after Christmas, I was with my 2 female friends, which I will refer to as M and A, and we decided to contact a dealer that M knew. I had never met this dealer before, but M claimed that he was a reliable source of good weed. She made the arrangements over the phone and we drove to his house, where M went inside to purchase the pot. We had all pitched in money and planned to get about a quarter ounce of what we were told was very high quality nugget. M soon returned and I anxiously looked at the weed that she brought back with her. We all recognized it as looking like very poor quality weed. M suggested that we try to smoke it before making a judgment, and we did just that by packing a bowl. The smoke was unpleasant, but it didn't taste that abnormal at the time. After only 2 hits I felt extraordinarily stoned. This was reminiscent of a very deep and sedative indica high, but it was on a much different level. I was extremely sedated and my motivation to do anything other than sit in position in the car was completely gone. Everyone was eerily quiet in the car and seemingly irritable when we went to split the weed up at A's house. Since I was on a seasonal vacation from school, I had decided to spend the next few days laying around the house and smoking my newly acquired pot. The main odd thing that I had noticed at this point was that I was getting very high. More so than I ever had been before, and I have been smoking weed consistently since I was 14 years old. I also had lost the ability to fake being sober while on it. It was painfully obvious that I was inebriated when I walked around my house. Since I had just ended a relatively long pot break, I still wasn't fully adjusted to being high again, so I attributed this overwhelming stoning to not having any tolerance. I also had almost forgot what it was like to be ordinarily high, which commonly happens when you take a break for long enough. Soon came New Year's Eve. I was staying at A's house with, coincidentally, M again. We planned on celebrating the arrival of the new year in the typical fashion of getting very drunk and very stoned. Upon arriving, we all began to smoke a bowl. 1 bowl of this weed was more than enough and none of us needed to continue. One of the many differences between this and ordinary weed was that you could get high enough and be very sure of when you were at this level. Soon we began drinking hard liquor. I drank a few cups of vodka and wine and began to feel drunk. We decided to go and smoke more weed. We had smoked a lot this time, a few bowls. After finishing this I was very fucked up. We all seemed to be. We sat down in silence at a table in A's basement. Several of our friends soon arrived at A's basement door. They were having a party near her house and they wanted to join us. The first thing that one of them said to me was, "Man, you look dead." As they sat down and talked, I suddenly lost the ability to move my mouth. I literally could not move it. Soon my entire body was numb and my stomach was in intense agony. This hit me out of nowhere. This was followed by an extreme ringing noise in my ears. I got up to go to the bathroom and walking was nearly impossible. My entire body was numb. I stumbled in a stupor to the bathroom. It was very much like walking when very fucked up on quercetin, but even more debilitating. I walked into the bathroom and kneeled down on the floor for a few seconds, but then decided that I needed to go back for some reason. I walked back to the table and somehow managed to sit down. Soon my vision became completely grayscale and then strobed. This became horrifyingly intense and I absolutely had to lay my head down. Soon my vision was entirely black. As I laid there, my stomach felt worse than it ever has in my entire life. My eyes were involuntarily oscillating. I was sure that I was going to die. I thought about what my parents would think when they found out that I had died from a drug overdose. This seemed to last a very long time. I wanted desperately to tell someone to take me to a hospital, but I was completely paralyzed. I could not move. Then suddenly I came back into consciousness. The stomach pains lessened and I propped my head up. I was still unsure of what had just happened, but I now knew that this was definitely not ordinary weed. Soon the other friends left except for one, I will call him R. We all went outside to smoke a cigarette and M wanted to smoke another bowl. I did not join in this time. I started talking to M about how unusual and disassociating this weed was, and she actually told me that she suspected that it was laced the day after we had purchased it. She still persisted to smoke it though, being the uninhibited person that she tends to be. Our friend R said he would take a hit to see what he felt. He took a very small hit but claimed to feel very disassociated and very stoned. Throughout the rest of the night we discussed the possibility of the weed being laced. I felt very oddly dissociated at times. My surroundings felt surreal and I was, well, disassociated. At one point in the night while we sat outside I felt somewhat euphoric on the very detached come down. Our friends had all also noticed how extremely pale we had become. It was very obvious. I quickly came to the conclusion, after reading much information, that it was laced with PCP. M was extremely skeptical of this and continued to deny that it was laced with PCP for nearly a month. I hid what I had left of this weed in my closet while M continued to smoke it. A few weeks later I had not smoked since the New Year's incident and I was in the middle of a confusing and mentally draining situation with my girlfriend at the time. I was very stressed out and I made a mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life. I smoked more of the weed. I was starting to be persuaded by M that it wasn't laced with PCP and that it was just an overpowering type of weed. I started smoking it again but I would only take one hit each night. One hit of a minuscule amount of the weed was more than enough. After that I would often lay and feel as though I was moving, comparative as to how you would feel if you closed your eyes while on a carousel. I of course continued to be very inebriated. I noticed that the high also came in waves. One moment I would feel fine and then I would be very stoned again. I continued smoking it for a few weeks until I gave in to my instinct and stopped. To my surprise I would always feel fucked up and stoned again when I would first wake up in the morning or smoke cigarettes. I also began to notice my extreme paleness, odd facial structure changes, and what seemed like a rash on my forehead. A few weeks after quitting I started to experience severe psychosis. I felt delirious and out of touch with reality all of the time. Everything was surreal and I was undoubtedly depressed like I had never been before. All of those who had smoked the PCP seemed to be having identical after effects. We all had a lot of trouble articulating words and forming sentences and we slurred our speech. This schizophrenic-like phase was so long ago that I can't quite remember all of the effects but I was psychotic like I had never been before. I cannot stress how horrible this was enough. I became irritated with anyone who would talk to me and I had several very aggressive fits of absolute rage after simply looking in the mirror. I hadn't even considered the fact that this all had stemmed from smoking PCP, because my mind was so clouded at the time. I did not know of the horribly negative after effects of PCP because they are not well documented. When I would wake up from sleep I would feel very stoned again and it was as though my dream hallucinations lingered on for a while when I first awoke in a daze. I am still unsure of why this is. It was very out of the ordinary. A month or so after quitting I had told my other friends from school of this odd weed. They decided to test out the weed. They felt confident that it was not laced with PCP. One suggested that it was just sprayed with an herbicide. We drove around and I gave them what I had left of this weed to smoke. I refused to join them. Immediately one of them, a self-acclaimed connoisseur of weed, said that it smelt of plastic and was not typical of weed at all. I had not noticed a very pungent odor until he had pointed it out. It does have a very distinct smell but I wouldn't compare it to plastic. They smoked it and both said that they felt very stoned but not extremely abnormal. Soon they claimed to be very disassociated and they noted how the stone feeling that it created occurred in waves. They decided on calling their 50-year-old veteran psychonaut friend who had actually smoked PCP many times in the past in order to verify what this was. We met him and he took one hit of the pipe. He said that it was without a doubt PCP and that we were in for the mental hell of our lives. Soon thereafter these two friends stumbled onto the source that the dealer had got this weed from and further verified that it is definitely PCP. Both of them also persisted on smoking more of it for a while. It has now been 6 months since I stopped smoking PCP. Although it is easy to blame my problems at the present on a drug, I know that my life has been partially ruined by PCP. My skin and appearance is much different, I am clinically depressed and fatigued to the point where I barely can function at times, and I am very irritable, cynical, and aggressive. I used to be such a passive and easygoing guy. The personality shift that resulted from this has cost me 2 girlfriends, a job, and the majority of my friends. I no longer get the pleasurable marijuana highs that I miss so much. For a while afterwards all that I felt when smoking ordinary unlaced weed was a stupor like PCP high. After a while that faded away but pot then just burnt me out and sent me into horrible depressive states for weeks. I have now abstained from smoking weed for a few months and I worry that I will never be able to simply get innocently high again. Nobody should ever take that for granted. PCP is a lot more dangerous, when used excessively, than it seems to be perceived by the drug-consuming community. It does not inspire you to go on psychotic rages when high on it but the schizophrenia and the fucking mental hell that it can induce very well could. The after effects on many brain chemicals, hormones, and your body can be permanent and it is neurotoxic. I am still very much negatively affected to this day, and I know that I will never be quite normal again. All of those who had smoked the PCP-laced weed, including the friends who had tested it out, have all claimed to some degree to be severely depressed, worn out, and/or psychotic after smoking this horrible substance. I have also personally noticed that everyone involved in smoking it seemed to have very similar and damaging after effects. My weed was laced with PCP. It does happen, and it is not a myth. I have since found out that PCP is one of the easier chemicals to make. It is very economical to spray PCP on dirt weed and sell it as high-quality weed for 5 to 6 times its original value. Be careful when habitually using this chemical, as it will put you through a hell that many will not be mentally strong enough to handle.